now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our guests of honor today before they take it away. As a journalist, author, and public speaker, Lee Woodruff has spent her career in the media and marketing world. She's a contributor for CBS This Morning, co-founder of the Bob Woodruff Foundation, and currently runs a media training and communications consulting business. Lee garnered critical acclaim for her best-selling book, In an Instant, the compelling and humorous chronicle of her family's journey to recover following her husband Bob's roadside bomb injury in Iraq while reporting on the war. She's also the author of Perfectly Imperfect and Those We Love Most. And of course, Deborah Goodrich Royce's first novel, Finding Mrs. Ford, debuted in 2019 to rave reviews. She divides her time between the Northeast and Florida, where she writes, reads, watches a lot of movies, and spends time with her family. She serves on many boards, including the Avon Theater, the American Film Institute, New York Botanical Garden, the Greenwich International Film Festival, the Greenwich Historical Society, and others. Deborah holds a BA in French and Italian from Lake Erie College and an honorary doctorate from the same institution. In an earlier life, she was an actress in film and television and a story editor at Miramax Films. And I know I'm looking forward to hearing more about that tonight. Ruby Falls is her second psychological thriller, and she owes a debt of gratitude for its inspiration to Daphne du Maurier and Alfred Hitchcock. It is a nail-biting tale of a fragile young actress, the new husband she barely knows, and her growing suspicion that the secrets he harbors may even eclipse her own. We loved Ruby Falls so much, it's actually a staff pick at the bookstore. I'm gonna hold it up again. Julie called it a spellbinding psychological thriller, and she said, you will be turning pages until the final unexpected twist, which is literally exactly what I did. So that's about it from me. I'm going to pass things off to Lee and Deborah to get us started, and I will see you both later for Q&A.
Wow, Deb, that was an amazing introduction, wasn't it?
Very good. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, Lee.
Hi. So full disclosure, Deb and I met 2 months ago for the first time. We had been social media friends. And then we met for the first time for lunch and then realized that that night we were both going to be in black tie, me less so than her. She really dresses up well, at the Botanical Gardens, where she is, is it a board of trustee or?
Yeah, a member of the board of trustees at New York Botanical Garden.
Yep. So we got to, it was a fun 2 times in one day. And I think that there's so many parts of Deb, as you just heard. From Abby's intro, but just this, I'm going to start with the contributor to your communities and the giver back piece.
Yeah, so, that's interesting. I would say in my younger adulthood, I was more like probably many young women. It was really through the schools of my children that I did a lot of my volunteering, not so much apart from that. And it was when I married Chuck, the man I am married to, and moved to Greenwich, Connecticut. I got involved. He and we took on these crazy restoration projects. So the first one was the Avon, and that really came out of, there was a cinema in Stamford, Connecticut, the next town, that had been closed, a beautiful 1939. I'm not going to say a movie palace because it wasn't like one of those very grandiose ones, but a very beautiful theater that had been closed. And he said to me, well, you were in the movie business. Let's open this movie theater. And I think I was a little snotty. I said, well, I don't know anything about that end of the movie business. But in the end, it's been one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done. And I'm still the chairman of the board of the Avon, and we are going strong. And then Chuck and I have done all these other restoration projects, some of them that are more commercial, like hotels, like the Ocean House. And many of them, we're involved in 2 towns, Westerly, Rhode Island, and Tannersville, New York, which is in the Catskills, where we've done a lot of Main Street revitalization projects. The idea being to fix up a Main Street building and work to try to get local business owners to take over local businesses or start local businesses.
So many places to go with that, because here we are at one of the most iconic local businesses, RJ Julia in Madison, Wisconsin. So hats off to our independent businesses. I love the through line of the movies, and we'll get back and we'll talk about that part of your life. But let's just jump right into the book for starters, because the psychological thriller piece, I mean, as not just an actress, but then a movie looking at scripts and looking at stories, let's talk about how that played into, was this always an end goal to be an author, or did this just grow out of the chapters of your life?
Well, you want a packaged answer or an honest answer? I'll give you the honest.
I throw into the chat, what do we want? Let's try, I'm going to choose both. I think you can do both.
I'll give you the honest answer.
Yeah.
The honest answer is, I'm probably one of those people who, my husband probably thinks I have a plan for everything, and I don't really have a plan for anything. I don't want to say things just happen in my life, because I work very, very hard, but I think there are moments where there's an intersection of something magical that happens or comes to you, meaning the universal you, one, me, and then it's what you do with it. So the writing aspect of my life, I was an actress. There was a transition. My children were small. Were we going to stay in LA? We had an opportunity to move to Paris. My first husband was from there. I knew that moving to Paris would really be the death knell of my acting career. Very few American actresses, do French films. That's Jean Seberg and I don't know who else. So the decision was made to go, and that weird kind of unplanned moment, and a moment where I was letting go of one thing, oddly became a really slow transition to writing, because I was hired when I got there as a reader for a French film studio. And, readers are people who it's a freelance job, and you read manuscripts to give them coverage, and coverage is a synopsis and notes about what works and what doesn't. So that began the transition to writing. And then it was a moment where I went from there to Miramax, and I was the story editor at Miramax. And that for me throughout the 90s was really my writing school. But the moment I really picked up my, fingers on the computer was when my first husband was leaving me. It was a very dark moment in my life. I laugh now because I have survived, but it was so horrible, and I was so low, and I was such a mess, that this Othello-like Black comedy came to me, in which I wrote this screenplay with a writing partner, wonderful friend, Mitch D'Annunzio, who's a screenwriter. And the vision was a woman who believes she has a perfect life. Her kids are perfect, her husband's perfect, the marriage is perfect, the house is perfect, the dog is perfect. And she starts to suspect her husband is having an affair, and she cracks. She does not have the coping skills to deal with it. And she decides that she does not want to be, this reject has-been throwaway. She'll kill him. And the comedy comes in the absurdity of these ridiculous ways that she sets about trying to kill her husband. So it was cathartic. It was the moment in time. We've just dusted it off again. I think it could be, I picture certain actresses. I've always pictured someone like Kristen Wiig. If you remember her in Bridesmaids, the way she was coming unglued on that airplane is that kind of role. Someone who's so unattractive in her behavior, but you like her anyway. So, did I always know I would be a writer? That's a yes and no, a long yes and no. So I was writing along the way. I was in writing groups, but it was very sporadic in terms of putting real effort into it.
I'm muting myself because My laundry's going and there's no door on the mudroom. So it'll be done in just a minute. So forgive me if you guys hear a rocking noise in just a minute. This is real life. Psychological thrillers, though, those require such a taut ability. I mean, did that come from the screenplay? And then let's get into where Ruby Falls came from, because I know some of those answers, but I'd rather have you tell us. That genre is hard to do well, Deb, and you do it well.
Okay, well, maybe it's a genre I've always loved. I love pacing. I love short chapters. I was an actress on a soap opera, and the soap opera is, the epicenter of the cliffhanger. I think my chapters end with something. I mean, it's not like a soap opera where it's da 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 with people staring at each other and those meaningful hanging glances they have at the end. But I try to end each chapter making you want to go to the next. So psychological thrillers, I think of my books as really being identity thrillers. And by that, I mean, I just love the question of who people are, how they present themselves, who they pretend to be, and what's really going on underneath. I think everybody has secrets. Most of them are pretty benign. I've had experiences with people whose secrets are of a greater magnitude, and I'm always both dumbfounded and not surprised at the same time, if that can be true. So I worked at Miramax. I worked for Harvey Weinstein. I didn't know anything about his personal life. I didn't have that close a working relationship with him. So when that all came out, people said, well, everybody in the movie business knew. And I'm thinking, well, am I a particular idiot? I didn't know. How would I know? And then people say, well, were you surprised? I don't know. I mean, I think whenever these things come out about people, and again, I make no pretense to know anything about his personal life, but these things happen all the time throughout human history. So, and people present themselves in certain ways, and they present themselves differently to different people. They compartmentalize, and that fascinates me. I had lunch with Katie Mahon today, who wrote The Miracle Collectors, and she had an encounter as a very young woman with Ted Bundy. And I did the movie with Mark Harmon about Ted Bundy, and I played the woman who married him. Now, what was she thinking? I can only guess that she didn't believe he did that. I mean, I can't imagine that she married him thinking he did it. So how did he compartmentalize himself that way with her, And I'm not even just talking about psychopaths and serial killers. I think it's a factor of human life that every once in a while, you just hear the darndest stories about people and you just can't believe it. You just can't believe it. And you think, aha, yep, there's another one. So that fascinates me.
So let's talk about how that plays into Ruby Falls and how you got that grain of the idea.
So that was another weird moment. The first 2 chapters of that book just downloaded in my brain. I was sitting right over there in this house about to go to dinner. I was fiddling around with ideas for a different book. I'd finished my first book. It was out on submission. And the first 2 chapters just came to me. So where did they come from? I went to Ruby Falls as a child. It did scare me. I remember the lights being turned off. I mean, the book begins in a cave in the pitch black dark, where a little girl is abandoned by her father, while a tour guide is giving some speech about this bottomless lake that the water is falling into, and she cannot identify where it is because the sound is echoing around her. And I thought that's such a terrifying premise. My parents did not leave me there, but obviously, this idea that every experience you have is there in this little computer of your brain. So there was something there. There was a kernel of it. And that came to me. And then the next chapter, where she's a young actress on a soap opera, which I was, and she's married a tall, dark, and handsome stranger spontaneously, and has gone to Rome and is about to go into the catacombs with him when she has an attack of claustrophobia and opts not to tell him what happened to her as a child. So all of that just came, then I spent a couple of years figuring out a book from there. So, where does that stuff come from? I love the book by Elizabeth Gilbert, Big Magic. She talks about ideas really in every arena of life, whether it's art or science or literature or any kind of advance in the world, that there are ideas that have a moment when they're coming through. I mean, you think about Tesla and was it Westinghouse? Who was two people, Marconi and Tesla, had the same idea for the radio at the exact same moment. And I think that's a truism. So what Gilbert says is, so an idea will come to you. It's up to you if you're going to catch the idea and make something of it. So the genesis of Ruby Falls, there were two overarching elements that were very evident to me when I had that burst of inspiration. One was an examination of trauma, and the book really is an examination of a primal trauma that happens to a young girl, and I guess, what we would now call PTSD, and whether or not a person can make sense of something like that type of abandonment in such a frightening way. And the other idea that I wanted to play with, I'm such a book and movie lover, and I love things that reference other things. So this is not a rewrite of Rebecca at all. It goes to a very different place, but I'm playing with a lot of Gothic themes. And, you think Jane Eyre, A Woman in White, Rebecca, all of those setups. And I had a lot of fun playing with that. And the part of the Gothic part too was also mood. I think for me, the mood that I set, most of the book is set in Los Angeles, in the Hollywood Hills. And for me, that the Hollywood Hills, it's such an iconic and evocative place of things that I've seen my whole life as a movie watcher. I think we all have. And it's a slightly, Carl Hyacin said about Florida, it's what did he say? It's a sunny place for shady people. And I think Los Angeles can have that feeling. There's this very glittery surface, and there can be a very seedy underbelly. So in the way that in Rebecca, Daphne du Maurier, Manderley, the house, is really almost a character. I wanted the streets of Hollywood and this cottage to have that same moody feeling.
And so they do. So first of all, I forgot to shout out to Abby that I think, Abby, your question about Harvey Weinstein was answered, because I know that's what you wanted me to ask. And I love the way
the question about Harvey.
Well, she just sort of said, I want to hear about your time at Miramax. And there's kind of just one big question there, which would have been, did you know? And you just offered that right up, which makes
I didn't know. And it's very complicated. I have a very deep debt of gratitude to him. He gave me an incredible opportunity. I'd been an actress, and yes, I was a freelance reader before he hired me as a story editor, but it was a very big job and it was a very big risk. And I worked hard and I learned a lot. And for me, I think of it as my writing school. So, so hard to separate out all these aspects.
Two things can be true, can't they? You can have had a great experience there, and he can have had a compartment that you, thank God, weren't exposed to. So,
and I think that's human history. And in a nutshell, that's kind of what I write about.
I was just going to say that's, well, no, but that is, in a way, you've got, if we're all jewels, we have many facets. And you do a great job in both books, because I read your first book and loved it, of like showing us the different cuts around the gem. And that's not easy to do. So I know that your script background and reading all those stories must have fed into how do you create a page turner? Because at the end of the day, even with literary fiction, I want to keep turning the pages.
Yeah, and those years of editing other people's work, the editorial job is a very mentally clarifying job, because you're looking very hard at the written word, and you're thinking, why does it work? Why does it not work? I have to articulate that. And it was very helpful for me.
Can you talk a little bit, because all readers and writers want to hear about process. So can you talk, are you sit down and do it every 3 hours, 3 hours for every single day, a couple of days a week? How does this work? Because you have a very full and busy life.
So when I started writing really seriously, which was about 7 years ago, again, I had been writing all along. I'd been involved with writers groups. I'm a big believer in writers groups because for me, they were interesting ways of starting to recognize my own voice from people's reaction to what worked and what didn't work with what I was doing. So that was extraordinarily helpful. Highly recommended to other people. So in 2014, I had the empty nest, and I have worked my tail off the whole time I was raising children. But I've worked my tail off in a different way, in very busy things. You know, raising children is a busy activity. You know, the phone's ringing, you're stirring the soup, this is going on, that's going on, the dog's barking. So I was doing busy projects. Writing for me, that cone of silence, was harder to do while raising children. So that moment of the empty nest, 2014, I had an idea for a book, started to really sit down and write it. And I was only writing about 1 day a week. And a very dear friend of mine who's written 7 books very sweetly said, "How many days a week are you writing, Deborah?" And I said, 1. She said, "You are never going to finish your book." So how I did it then in the early years, I would take my computer calendar or my cell phone calendar, and I would block out 3 to 5 hour windows virtually every day, occasionally skip days. I did, but for me, I couldn't achieve what many writers like, which is always at the same time and always in the morning, because I had these other conflicts. Going forward into COVID, wow, that cleared up a whole junk heap of obligations. So I was really able to have that straight away, you know, at the racetrack, coming down the home stretch. So I had long days, wrote a book in COVID. And now I'm back to figuring out that schedule because I'm both doing a book tour, finishing up. I just sent to an editor this 3rd book. And the last couple of weeks, I have not written because I don't want to write anything on the 3rd book while it's in the hands of the editor. I feel like for a brief moment, I can say, you know, let's just see what she says. But I'm getting antsy at not writing. So I do like to write every day. It is like everyone says, it's like a muscle. And the more you do it, the more the ideas flow.
Yeah. So can we ask you about the 3rd book?
You can. So identity. My mother's best friend was savagely murdered in 1948 in Pittsburgh. She was stabbed 36 times and found at home at the end of the evening by her parents who were returning from bowling. My mother was supposed to be at the house that night. And through a quirk of my grandmother saying, "No, you can't go," she was not there.
Wow.
It's an unsolved crime. So when something like that happens in close proximity to anybody's life, I mean, there's Dominic Dunn with what happened to his daughter who was murdered, and he became the great chronicler of murder trials. There's Michelle McNamara, who had had a girl murdered in her suburban Chicago town, and she became the person who unraveled that whole Golden State Killer in the book. She died while writing the book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. Dennis Lehane writes about this in Mystic River, about something that happens to a boy with a priest as a child, and the ripple effect that these acts of violence have on people around them. So the pandemic hit, I'd always thought about that story, and I don't want to write it nonfiction. For me, the easiest way to tell the truth conceptually is through fiction. I don't want to get burdened with facts. The brother of this girl was arrested multiple times. He is still alive. He's a very old man. I don't want to get into the business of saying whether he did it or not. So when the pandemic hit, I upped my research in that. And I started writing this dual narrative book set in Palm Beach, Florida during the pandemic, in the big crunch when we were all hunkered at home and, Cloroxing our bananas.
Yes.
So there's a middle-aged single writer who lives alone behind a grocery store in Palm Beach. And her chapters are very contemplative. She is digging into the murder of her mother's best friend, and she's sort of waxing philosophical about those types of murders and those types of events. And she digs up some doozies. At the same time, there's a book within a book, which is a more heart-driving thriller about a 40-year-old woman named Linda Alonso, who's married to a man from Argentina called Miguel Alonso. And he disappears a few weeks into the pandemic on a plane to Buenos Aires with the children. And she cannot follow because they've closed the skies to Argentina. So you've got the story of the writer who seems to be going off on all these tangents, and you've got Linda and the disappeared husband. And how do they intersect? And does it work? I don't know. I mean, they're two very different style narratives. I like it. So we'll see. I don't know.
Well, if you like it, we're going to like it. But that's a really anxious moment, isn't it? When you're waiting for feedback and you've poured yourself into something. So, yeah. And my advice, just enjoy this little downtime, because very soon you'll have that thing tapping at your shoulder that needs you.
Yeah, exactly right. My mother used to say that to me when I was an actress and I didn't have a job. She would say, enjoy this time.
Yeah.
And it's so true. It's so hard for us.
It is hard. And I would say that writing is a calling, and I have not been very good at answering it lately, but it's always there. And I do think you need to get into a glide. You need to get into.
Let me ask you about that. I mean, with the books you've written fiction and nonfiction. How do you get called for a particular work that you're compelled to write, rather than trying to, kind of game it a little bit more? How does it work for you?
I think so. I get an idea and I write. I have a whole file, like I'm sure you do, of just thoughts and things scribbled down, and then something will coalesce. And I, like you, I never thought I could write a book while mothering and working. And somehow I did. And now my nest is empty. And I have a full-time consulting business, but I still am just really challenged with my schedule. And I can't necessarily carve time every day. So what is your advice to the writers out there and the people listening who have a story in their head and have a book they want to produce, if they can't be, religious about it? What is some of your best advice?
So I would go 3 months at a time, 3 months from this day forward, and carve out what you can most days. Try to do every day, try to do 5 days, try to do 3 hours if you can only do an hour. And when you carve it out, make it sacred. Leave your phone, turn off the message functions on your computer, and maybe go to a place that's not your home office. Oh, look, my daughter has left 2 cats with me for the summer, and I have 2 dogs, and we're all getting used to each other. This is the cat, Ruby Falls.
How perfect for a psychological thriller.
Yes. So I would say, try to go to a space where you don't have the ringing phone and your pile of bills and all that. I don't write in my home office. It's just, it doesn't work for me. So I have a different spot. And I am very Pavlovian. So if I go to this one spot, I'm in writing mode. Mm-hmm. So I think we are like that. I'm fighting with the cat, get down. Make that your spot, go to that spot, try not to do anything else there, and just sit and do it. Some people in my writing group, they might get into a rhythm to get going of 10 minutes a day. And if that's all you can give, just 10 minutes a day. I haven't done that. I use bigger chunks.
10 minutes a day. I can't even download the book in my head in a half an hour.
No, I need bigger chunks, but I have heard of friends who've done that successfully. So
Do you see yourself staying in this genre? You talked about nonfiction, and I was writing a book at one point in time that didn't sort of work, and I didn't have the heart to go back, but I'm picking the bones of it right now for other things. You know how you sort of make it a poo-poo platter and you save the things that you like. And my advice from my agent was, don't stick to the facts. Like, the best thing you can do is free yourself from the facts, because this was a fiction piece based on Charles Manson. And it was kind of the best advice I got, but I had spent all of this time trying to write this quasi nonfiction thing. And when you say that you know, the thought of nonfiction, and I get it, like just the whole thought of research and having it be true to form. Do you ever see yourself with a story? I understand why you might not want to write about your mother's friend's murder, but do you ever see yourself getting into the thriller mode where you would take a story that no one's heard of and exhume it?
Well, like the murder of my mother's friend, and do it as a true crime book. I thought about that. And I also thought about, and I was really trying to see if there was a precedent for a book that was both nonfiction and fiction.
Huh, that's interesting. Could you find one?
No, I couldn't really. I mean, in the film world, I thought a little bit about filmmakers like Charlie Kaufman, who does those odd things like Being John Malkovich. Remember that movie where people would take an elevator to
Yes.
a half floor in a building and come out inside John Malkovich's head?
Right, his brain,
So
yeah.
that wasn't really fiction and nonfiction, but John Malkovich was playing John Malkovich in this crazy story. And he also did one based on the Orchid book.
I was going to say The Orchid Thief is like that as well. Was that the same director?
Yes.
Yeah. It was the
So
same.
he was kind of my thought process there. And I mean, you don't have to do something just because other people have done it. But the murder, I decided to, it's very thinly fictionalized, by the way. I've changed names. I've even used the same dates. I don't know if it'll end up that way. It's just because you can't quite get to all the facts. So I don't know. And then people say, well, would you ever write a memoir? You've had such an interesting life. The tricky thing with memoir is, what do you leave out? I mean, how do you keep memoir from just being a laundry list of, then this happened and then that happened?
Many are that way. The trick is in the sauce, and I don't think you can be prescriptive about it.
No, and I think with fiction, I mean, in the 3 books I've written, I steal wantonly from my own life and other people's lives, but in a very selective way.
Right.
Like Finding Mrs. Ford is completely set in our house in Watch Hill. And when I walked into that house the first time, I thought, oh, I would love to set a new version of The Ghost in Mrs. Muir in this house. And I percolated that for years. I thought, you know, a widow leaves New York after 9/11. She's lost her husband. And in the end, I didn't write that there. But there is a bit of it, because the Mrs. Ford is a widow, and the kind of unseen presence of her husband is a real factor for her. So that it's my little teeny homage to The Ghost in Mrs. Muir in that house, on next to the lighthouse.
Do you think we're the only 2 people on this call that ever watched The Ghost and Mrs. Muir and even know what it is?
Everybody weigh in.
Yes,
Weigh
put
in.
that in the
Well,
chat,
and if you haven't, you should watch The Ghost in Mrs.
Yeah.
Muir. It's a
And it
beautiful-
is ripe for a reboot, and I think you're just the gal to do that.
Well, I think I sort of did what I had to do with that. The same with Rebecca. I didn't do a complete remake of Rebecca. I watched the Lily James cat hair.
Making you
The Lily James Army Hammer thing. Talk about secrets. We won't go there.
with in real life, you mean? Are you okay?
Yes, it's just cat hair. I did as much as I wanted to do with Rebecca. I took a kernel of it and then went in a different direction.
Yeah.
And
Great direction. How much of you, besides going to Ruby Falls, is in Ruby? Because we all do insert ourselves in fiction. How can we not? We've felt things, we've lived lives, we've had experiences that we can write about vividly.
Well, I was an actress on the soap opera. I was written out. I played the sister of Susan Lucci, the star.
Did Susan kill you? Because didn't she kill a lot of people?
No, I
Never did.
engaged in a gaslighting plot of her, and she killed her boyfriend because she was the spokesmodel. That was the term they used for a cosmetic company. And it was a father-son team, Lars Bogard and Kent Bogard. So I seduced Kent, and then she killed him, and then I went to prison.
As you should have done, because Susan Lucci should always be able to wiggle out of it.
That's right. But so how much is based on it? So I created the diva of the show. I called her Sylvia Long.
Right.
I do say at the end that she bears no resemblance to Susan Lucci. But I ran into Susan Lucci right before COVID in Florida. And she said to me, I have your book. So that was the first book. I don't know if she has this book yet.
We need to send it to her. And I'm going to imagine Susan Lucci just the way she always appeared to me on daytime TV. Still beautiful, still without a flaw.
She's shockingly beautiful.
Tiny.
She is itty bitty, just minuscule in all ways, and shockingly beautiful still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, before we go to questions, and I know there's one in there, and I know everyone's ginning up their next ones, and I can keep going on mine. But as someone who's intimately involved in bringing movies to life, I mean, honestly, you were both a dream maker and a dream killer in your role, because, you know, if you didn't like something and I'd written a script, I mean, I'm going to assume you came at it agnostically, but if you weren't going to write up a good, you know, sort of get this to the next level piece, it was not going to go anywhere. What are your favorite movies? And what are the top 5 movies everybody on this webinar should watch?
Fanny and Alexander by Ingmar Bergman is a movie I watch every Christmas. One of my daughters tears her hair out, and one will sit with me for a little bit. So why do I love Fanny and Alexander? To me, it is a weepingly beautiful portrait of an artistic family, a big, sloppy, rambunctious artistic family, the kind of family I wanted to be a part of. And it's also allegorical of a human life. You know, it starts absolutely beautiful and it goes through a very dark passage and then comes out the other end. So Fanny and Alexander is one of my favorite movies of all time. I would then say, I'm going to say The Umbrellas of Cherbourg is another absolute favorite of all time by Jacques Demy. And it was somewhat redone in the way that I redo the things I'm talking about. It was referenced by La La Land. And I would feature The Umbrellas of Cherbourg and La La Land. First of all, the music is, there are so many passages of music that are very similar. And those to me are just the most romantic movies I've ever seen. So that's 3 I've given you.
I need some I need some Alfred Hitchcocky type.
Oh,
yeah,
well, I would put in Vertigo. I would put in Rear Window. I would put in, To Catch a Thief for the humor. I would put in Notorious. I mean, so many of Hitchcock's. I would also, if you can handle blood and gore, I'd put in Brian De Palma. Body Double is a brilliant film.
Yes, it is.
De Palma was really an heir to Hitchcock, just a little too gory for me. And then the one in Florida, Body Heat, with Kathleen Turner.
Yeah, and what about the Coen brothers? A different genre of funny, campy, kind of bloody. The Chippa.
Absolutely, yes. And I'm a huge Wes Anderson fan.
Yeah.
And what's her name? The movie she did in Sacramento.
Frances McDormand?
No, the tall blonde one. She did the one with the girl from Brooklyn.
guys.
Irish actress who did Sacramento. Hang on, I'm Googling.
All right, she's going to Google. And while she's Googling, I hope you're all going to prepare your
questions.
Yeah. I think we have, it sounds, Greta Gerwig.
Greta Gerwig. Yes. And what's that film called that I love?
Francis, like a name, Frances Ha?
That's a different film. The one she does, oh God. Someone's come up with it.
Lady Bird. Yes.
Lady Bird.
Abby.
Love that movie.
Abby, awesome.
Yeah,
do we want to go to the chat? Because I also want to ask you, and then I can go back. What is a question that you wanted me to ask you, or you would like to tell us about you?
So this is something I don't normally talk about. How do I make life work? Like, how do I get up every morning? How do I continue on in the face of it all? For me, it's always been really vitally important to have a spiritual practice. And it's on my mind because I was talking about it with somebody today, with Katie Mahon. And I start my day every day for decades with a spiritual practice. I'm a little bit eclectic with what I use. I was raised Catholic. I go to an Episcopal church. I've spent years going to an ashram. I've studied the Course in Miracles. So for me, it all kind of comes together. I don't see a lot of difference. I mean, that might upset some people, but I see a great oneness in it all. But that is one of the most vital things I do to survive as a human being, to write books, to not be a screaming mad person. I have to have this thing I do in the morning. Sometimes it revolves around reading. I can pick up different things that I might read for a while. It always has a component of meditation, not long. I'm not a very good meditator. And then there's an aspect of reminding myself throughout the day of something I'm thinking about.
That's a grounding thing. And I think there's something to ritual in writing. I mean, you've talked about your own ritual with writing. And I too agree, and sorry if I'm going to offend anyone, that we're all talking about the same thing up there, the same power, the same sort of sense of hope, and something more than just this.
I once was listening to something, somebody had written a book and they were talking about exalted spiritual experiences. And the way this person was talking about it, that scientifically, or I don't know, we get to a certain point, and if we have a really out-of-body experience or a transformative experience, we often latch on to whatever path we're practicing that gave it to us. But if we keep going to a higher level, we start to see the oneness of it all. Anyway, that's what I believe.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I know we have a question in the box, and I'm just going to go with one more question because our mutual friend, Susie Stanglin, and I were talking today because I was sort of saying, like, give me your best questions and so forth. And she was, going through your career trajectory, and you have a very similar trajectory to me. I'm a big believer that life comes in chapters. And you evolve out of one thing, and there isn't just one path, as we know, and you can have many careers, and that ability to sort of reinvent yourself is probably the key to life. And very, very quickly, I read a great article once, and I ended up writing a blog about it, Darwin versus Beethoven. And the concept is, are you a Darwin or a Beethoven? And in Darwin's life, he did this one amazing, incredible thing, and then was known for it and kept trying to make another thing happen that couldn't happen because of many different reasons. Beethoven, who created and then began to realize that his powers were waning, became a fantastic teacher in the second part of his life and found his purpose, died beloved. Darwin died broke in a, flop house somewhere. And so how do you continue to take what you've done and move forward? And you've done, Susie called it a sequential career, I think was her term. And it's such a great term for you and what you've done. Tell us how that happened. Tell us that's the best advice we have for longevity and for happiness.
I think we as women we expect to do that. We have always expected to do it for a very long time in female history. I think we expect to have what we do first and then have children and then what we do next. I think men have expected it less, but they're getting it more. So let's look at that moment, an unplanned choice where my first husband left me. I mean, I was really on my knees. And so what did I do? I wrote that screenplay. I took 2 jobs because we were in a state of financial ruin. So I didn't overthink it. I took a job working for my dear friend who's a decorator, you know, carrying her bags and writing her notes. I worked for a book scout and I was writing this screenplay. I got my mother to come up and stay with me. I started looking at an apartment because I thought I couldn't afford my house. I'm an action person. I think that's what I am. And when we moved to Paris, at the moment where I was mourning my acting career, and I can't take a lot of credit for it because I met a woman at a dinner party who asked if I would consider reading scripts for this film studio. So that I can't take credit for, except I responded to the ask.
Yeah, you took the chance. That's a big move.
Okay, I can do that. And then I think I literally asked my then husband, can you show me how to use the computer? I don't even think, because I'd been an actress and it was, you know, back when I was in school, it was really more of a typewriter. So I was like figuring out, how am I going to send this to her? How am I going to do this? So I always feel better taking action. It is my comfort. I feel almost like a wild woman if you were to say, you just sit there and just relax.
No one puts baby in a corner. That's what I have to say about you, girl. Movie line. Hey, Abby, should we do our thing? Do you want to, hi there. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have an audience question, and then I think I have 1 or 2 of my own to kind of close things out, if that sounds good. All right, and might I remind our audience that the Q&A is ready and waiting should something strike you in the next 10 minutes while we have these lovely ladies here. So, what aspect of author life has most surprised you?
Ooh.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I have found out that I'm actually really an introvert in some ways, or a homebody in some ways that I didn't understand. I love just endless days at home, writing alone. So when COVID hit, and I'm very mindful that people had terrible experiences with COVID, I did not. I was very blessed. No real sickness or loss in our family. So the rhythm of life, I just adored that complete silence and quieting. So that surprised me. I didn't know that about myself.
And I think we might have even talked about this at lunch. For the writers I know, COVID was either an accelerator, as it was for you, or it was just for me. I find that when I'm out in the world, I get more energized to write when I'm just around people. I felt no creativity during that time because there was nothing stimulating me from the outside. And it's interesting how people either did one or the other.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
Yeah.
It does seem to have, yes, fall into those 2 extremes.
Yeah.
One that I had, and I thought this might be fun to show. So you actually include a picture of yourself visiting Ruby Falls as a youngster. And I was wondering if you could talk about how that childhood visit was sort of like, I guess, the inspiration for the location of Ruby Falls in the book, because I thought that was neat.
So let's talk about the discovery of that photo for a minute. It was November, and I had sent the manuscript to a director, Fred Walton. He directed April Fool's Day that I was in. He also did a really iconic film called When a Stranger Calls with Carol Kane. Does anybody remember that? The girl's babysitting and she keeps getting prank calls.
Yes!
And the punchline is the police call and they say, get out of the house now. He's calling from upstairs and you're in the audience like, ah! So I sent Fred Walton this manuscript and he wrote me a lovely email. And this was November and I was talking to my dear friend who's also named Lee. And I said, you know, Lee, this is really meaningful that Fred, he's not that much older than I am, but it's almost like a father figure. And my father died when I was 19 and he didn't see anything I've done and he didn't know about my acting career and he didn't know about Ruby Falls, blah, blah, blah. So that day I went to a storage unit. I was looking for some baby clothes for my daughter has a baby. And it was getting to that moment where if I didn't find these baby clothes, the baby was growing out of them. So as I was there was a box of papers and that photo fell out of it. And I really got chills because I thought it was a little wink from above of dear old dad saying, I see you. You don't think I see you, but I see you. So the book was in production, but I was able to get the publisher to put it in the back. So yeah, I did go to Ruby Falls as a child. They did not leave me there, but it really scared me. And I did go to the catacombs in Rome and I really felt very claustrophobic. That Ruby Falls, and I think about it now because I've looked at pictures of Ruby Falls on the internet and it looks like they have pretty purple fuchsia lights on the falls. What I remember was they shut the lights off to pitch black dark. It doesn't even make any sense that they would do that. I mean, somebody would get hurt, they'd get sued nowadays. It's what I remember. It really had an impact on me.
God, yeah, like pitch darkness. That sounds scary.
Did you want to go back and see Ruby Falls while you were writing it? Or I guess it was COVID. You
Not for all the tea in China, not for millions of dollars, not for anything would I go back down there. Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
Well, when they turn this into a movie, you may be eating your words, girlfriend. Okay, you may be doing.
Sit up top and watch on the monitor when they're filming
the mouth of the cave. We're in your good hands, Abby, and you're not allowed to ask another Harvey Weinstein question.
Cover that.
I was just wondering about her experience in general as an actress. I did not have a specific idea in mind, but you did touch on some interesting details, I thought. So we do have an audience question. Someone is wondering how your mother would factor into regarding the novel on her friend's murder, because I imagine that's a very personal.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I've warned her that I've made the mother and the daughter far more dysfunctional than I think we are, but who knows? So in fictionalizing it, I made it a much more crippling aspect to the mother's life and hence the daughter's life. I'll tell you, in 2008, there was something that came up where I became privy through a friend who's a prosecutor to the reopening of that case where they brought in the original suspect and they found fabric that they sent to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia. They were hoping for a 60-year-old DNA conviction. And it was very complicated. The person failed the polygraph. There were some things that happened, but I know that it didn't really go anywhere. So it was dropped again. I think that moment in 2008 was extremely cathartic for my mother because we were told some things about the case at that time that led her to believe it really was this person. In this case, it was the brother, but the brother had been arrested multiple times and he was arrested again in 2008. How that was liberating for my mother. My mother had always felt extremely threatened at home. This idea that you could be in the safety of your home and this dark intruding force could come in and do harm to you. And somehow it was liberating for her to think that it didn't actually come from outside of the home at all, that she was not at the same risk that her friend was, that it wasn't just this random thing coming in. Not that her friend deserved it, but, and I don't know if the brother did it or not. It is similarly, treated in the book, but I don't really want to say that about the real case.
Well, I am so invested in this book already. Yeah. I can't wait. So it looks like, all right, I just have one more question to close things out for us. This is one of mine that I like to ask. So if you could have like a dream reader, anyone alive or dead, like who could read your book? Hitchcock, maybe. Who would it be?
Oh. Alive or dead? I'm thinking of Tana French. I'm going to go for a live one.
Good choice.
Well, that might happen. I mean,
yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's a possibility. Well, all right. Good answer. And by the way, Tana French's books are also available at RT Julia. This is my segue, and pair wonderfully, might I add, with Ruby Falls.
Like a fine wine, we say. And by the way, buy one, buy all. Buy everything you
great
can.
pairing for Ruby Falls. If you want to have like a Gothic weekend, I would read The Wife Upstairs with Ruby Falls. They're both treatments. One is a treatment of Jane Eyre. The other is a treatment of Rebecca. I think they're such a like Gothic rabbit hole to go down.
Well, and now I'm like getting really excited about this idea of book pairings. I'm going to have to keep percolating on them.
Pairings are fun.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Lee. This has been a wonderful conversation. I am so happy that I got to be here. I know. Ruby Falls, as I mentioned, is available in store and online from RJ Julia and BookHampton. And the links are there for you in the chat. And don't forget, if you're not already sold, we have signed book plates and special bookmarks if you order from our Madison RJ Julia location. So that's about it from me.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Lee.
Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for being here tonight too. And Deborah, see you soon.
See you soon, my dear. Thank you.